Time doesn't heal all wounds. It simply teaches us how to live with the scars. But sometimes, it offers something more, a chance to rewrite the ending. In the silent, steel, and glass expanse of an office that overlooked the sprawling city lights, Ethan Hayes sat motionless, a ghost in his own empire. He was a name whispered in legends across the tech world, the phantom architect of Phoenix Systems, a man worth billions who had never once appeared on the cover of a magazine. His privacy was his fortress, built brick by brick over 2 decades of relentless work. But tonight, a crack had appeared in the walls. On the polished obsidian of his desk lay a small navy blue velvet box. Inside, resting on white satin, was an invitation, its script a shimmering gold. It was from Northwood University, the prestigious institution that had, 20 years ago, cast him out like a common thief. They were cordially inviting him, the anonymous benefactor behind their largest ever donation, to a gala thrown in his honor. A ghost being invited back to his own haunting. His face, etched with a quiet intensity that success had not softened, remained a perfect mask of neutrality. But his eyes, dark and deep, were a storm of memory, the sterile smell of the dean's office, the weight of the 3 words that had shattered his world: academic fraud, ethical violation, immediate expulsion. He could still feel the phantom chill of the leather chair, the way the silence in the room had swallowed his protests whole. And he could still see them. Isabella, the love of his young life, her beautiful face, a portrait of practiced sorrow, and Marcus, his best friend, his brother, standing beside her, a hand on her shoulder, his expression a masterpiece of false sympathy. It wasn't the shouting that he remembered most vividly. It was the quiet that came after, the killing silence of their betrayal, a silence that had echoed in his ears for 20 years, fueling every line of code he ever wrote, every deal he ever closed, every sleepless night he ever endured. This invitation wasn't a peace offering. It wasn't an honor. It was a summons, a stage, meticulously set by fate. He slowly closed the velvet box, the soft click echoing in the vast office. They had written the first act of his life, but he had been building the theater for the last. And this time, he would be the one directing the final scene. Before the silence, there was the sound of a life that was meant to be. It was the sound of charcoal whispering across drafting paper in the sun-drenched halls of Northwood University's architecture school. It was the sound of laughter echoing across the manicured lawns, a sound that, for a time, belonged to 3 people who believed they were invincible. Northwood was a world built on old money and older traditions, a place where legacies were as important as lectures. And into this world walked Ethan Hayes, a ghost from a different reality. He didn't have a trust fund or a famous last name. He had a scholarship, a brilliant mind, and a pair of hands that could make blueprints sing. He was an anomaly, a working-class kid who saw angles and structures where others saw only empty space. He moved through the hallowed halls with a quiet confidence that unnerved the sons and daughters of senators and CEOs. He didn't belong, and yet he was undeniably the best among them. His talent was a raw, undeniable force, and it had drawn 2 of Northwood's brightest stars into its orbit. The first was Isabella Vance. To the world, Bella was an heiress. Her life a predetermined path of social events and strategic alliances. But with Ethan, she was just Bella. She saw past the worn-out jeans and the second-hand textbooks to the fire in his eyes. He spoke of building homes for people, not monuments for egos, and she found herself captivated by a future she had never been allowed to imagine. Their love was an act of quiet rebellion, forged in late-night study sessions and stolen moments in the campus library's forgotten corners. The third member of their trio was Marcus Thorne, charming, witty, and born with the easy grace that comes from never wanting for anything. Marcus was Ethan's best friend. He had taken the scholarship kid under his wing from the first day, introducing him to the right people, teaching him the unwritten rules of their gilded world. He and Bella had been friends since childhood, and together they formed a perfect, unbreakable circle. Or so it seemed. In the design studio, they were a force of nature. Ethan, the visionary, would lose himself in his work, his focus so absolute that the world around him would fade away. Bella, a gifted designer in her own right, was his perfect complement, her eye for aesthetics refining his raw structural genius. And Marcus was the presenter, the showman. He could take an idea and sell it with a charisma that was almost hypnotic. They were the golden trio, the future of architecture, and everyone knew it. But even in the brightest sunlight, shadows linger. The first and longest shadow was cast by Eleanor Vance, Bella's mother. Eleanor was a woman who did not simply exist in her social stratum, she commanded it. She viewed her daughter's relationship with Ethan not as a romance, but as a temporary, and rather inconvenient, lapse in judgment. She was never openly hostile. Her methods were far more insidious. At a formal university dinner, hosted at the Vance family's sprawling estate, Ethan found himself adrift in a sea of polite smiles and veiled condescension. Eleanor, gliding through the room like a galleon in full sail, made a point of introducing Ethan to a prominent alumnus. "And this," she had said, her voice smooth as silk, "is Ethan Hayes. Isabella's project. He's here on the Henderson Scholarship. So inspiring, isn't it, to see someone try so hard to overcome their circumstances?" The words were a dagger wrapped in velvet. Ethan felt Bella's hand tighten on his, a silent apology, but the wound had been inflicted. Later that evening, Eleanor found Ethan alone, admiring the architectural plans of the estate framed on the wall. "A beautiful home, isn't it?" she stated, more than asked. "Built by my great-grandfather. Legacy, Mr. Hayes, is the only blueprint that truly matters. Marcus understands that. His family and ours have been building this community for generations. One must be careful not to build something that cannot last." Her meaning was crystal clear. He was a temporary structure, destined for demolition. The pressure on Bella was relentless. Her mother's phone calls were a constant barrage of casual mentions of Marcus, of the Thorne family's new business venture, of the summer gala where Bella and Marcus would look so perfect together. Bella fought back, her loyalty to Ethan, a fierce, protective flame. "Mother, I love him," she would insist. "Love is a luxury, darling," Eleanor would reply coolly. "Security is a necessity." The other shadow was closer and therefore harder to see. Marcus's friendship was Ethan's anchor in the unfamiliar world of Northwood. He was generous, always ready with a clever joke or a word of encouragement. But beneath the surface, a bitter current of resentment was beginning to flow. Marcus had grown up being told he was the best, only to arrive at Northwood and find himself constantly in Ethan's shadow. He saw the way the professors looked at Ethan's work, with a reverence they never showed him. More than that, he saw the way Bella looked at Ethan. It was a look he had always craved for himself, a mixture of awe and unconditional love. His jealousy was a poison he sipped slowly, hiding it behind a smile. It manifested in small ways. A backhanded compliment. "Incredible work, Ethan. It's amazing what you can do with so little formal training before you got here." A subtle act of sabotage, disguised as help. "Hey, I think that load-bearing calculation is off. Let me run it for you," he'd offer, only to return a version that was slightly, almost imperceptibly, incorrect, forcing Ethan to waste hours finding a mistake that wasn't his. He would play the concerned friend to Bella. "I worry about him," Marcus would say, his brow furrowed with fake concern. "He's pushing himself so hard to prove he belongs here. I just hope he doesn't burn out or do something desperate." He was planting a seed, carefully tending the soil of doubt, waiting for the right moment for it to grow. The golden days, in hindsight, were never really golden. They were gilded. And the trio's final year was to be their ultimate test, the senior architectural showcase, a project that would define their careers. The grand prize was the coveted National Aspire Award, a ticket to instant stardom in the architectural world. Ethan's concept was revolutionary, a design for a sustainable, modular urban housing unit that was both beautiful and profoundly humane. It was more than a project. It was the culmination of everything he believed in. He poured his soul onto the page, working day and night, with Bella by his side. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the campus lake, Bella rested her head on his shoulder. "We're going to build cities together, you and I," she whispered, her breath fogging in the cool air. Ethan looked at her, his heart so full he felt it might burst. In that moment, he believed her. He believed in their future, in the strength of their love, in the loyalty of his best friend. He didn't see Marcus, standing in the shadow of the old library, watching them. The charming smile was gone from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. The sun was setting on their golden days, and a long, dark night was about to begin. The air at Northwood thickened as autumn bled into winter. It was a season of change, of endings and beginnings, and it was marked by the official announcement of the Senior Architectural Showcase. This wasn't just a final project, it was a coronation. And the crown was the National Aspire Award, a prize that didn't just launch a career, it created a legend. From the moment the announcement was made, a single name was on everyone's lips: Ethan Hayes. Whispers of his design circulated through the studios like a secret gospel. He was rumored to be crafting something more than a building. He was crafting a new way of living. The professors spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. The students watched him with a mixture of awe and envy. For Ethan, the pressure was a fuel. He thrived on it, disappearing into his work for days at a time, emerging only for coffee and brief moments with Bella. He was building his future, and he was sure she would be standing in it with him. For Marcus Thorne, however, the pressure was a vice, tightening around him with each passing day. The whispers of Ethan's genius were like stones thrown at the fragile glass of his own ego. The weight of his family's legacy, a legacy he was expected to not just continue but elevate, was becoming unbearable. One evening, the pressure found a voice. It was his father, calling from a boardroom in another city, his tone sharp and impatient. "I saw your preliminary drafts, Marcus." Richard Thorne's voice crackled over the phone. "They're adequate. Competent. Is that what we sent you to Northwood to become? Competent?" Marcus stared at his own designs, spread across his desk. They were good, but they lacked a soul. They were echoes of existing styles, technically perfect but emotionally hollow. "Father, the competition is intense," Marcus said, his own voice sounding weak to his ears. "Intense? Or is the competition simply better?" His father shot back. "I hear the Vance girl's scholarship friend, the Hayes boy, is creating something remarkable. It's a poor reflection on the Thorne name to be outshone by a charity case. I expect to see the Aspire Award in your hands. Do you understand? Don't disappoint me." The line went dead, but the words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Disappoint. It was the one word Marcus had feared his entire life. He looked at his reflection in the dark window of his dorm room. The charming, confident mask was gone. In its place was the face of a desperate man. At the Vance estate, a different kind of pressure was being applied, with a surgeon's precision. Eleanor Vance had escalated her campaign. She orchestrated a dinner party, a small, intimate affair. The guests of honor were the Thornes. And the seating arrangement, of course, placed Bella directly beside Marcus. Ethan was not invited. The excuse was flimsy, something about it being an old family engagement, but the message was a hammer blow. Throughout the dinner, Eleanor was a master puppeteer. She lauded Marcus's project, which he described with a practiced, hollow enthusiasm. "Now that," Eleanor proclaimed, tapping her wine glass for effect, "is a design that understands the market. It's bold, commercial. It's the kind of work that builds fortunes, that cements a legacy." She then turned her attention to Bella, her voice softening into a tone of maternal concern. "Darling, I know you're fond of Ethan, and his ideas are sweet, very charitable. But you have to understand, the world isn't a charity, it's a battlefield. You need a partner who can command it, not just dream about it." Bella defended Ethan, but her words lacked their usual fire. "His design is revolutionary, Mother. It could change the way people live." Or Eleanor countered smoothly, "It could be a footnote in an academic journal. Marcus is building the future, your future." The words were a poison, seeping into the cracks of doubt that Eleanor had so carefully created. The next day, the poison began to work. Ethan was explaining a breakthrough he'd had. a new composite material that would make his sustainable design more affordable. He was alive with passion, his eyes shining. But Bella seemed distracted. "It's brilliant, Ethan, it is," she said, her voice lacking conviction. "But is it practical? Mom's board of directors would never approve something so untested. It's a huge financial risk." Ethan stared at her, the light in his eyes dimming. "Since when do you sound like your mother's board of directors? This is about people, Bella, not profit margins. I thought you believed in that." "I do," she insisted, but a wall had risen between them, built from her mother's words and her own growing fears. "I just want you to be realistic." The conversation ended there, but the chill of it remained. Ethan felt a profound sense of loneliness. He was fighting for a future that his partner was no longer sure she wanted. That night, Marcus sat alone in the deserted design studio. The moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the workstations. On his table lay his competent design. Across the aisle was Ethan's space, a chaotic masterpiece of sketches, models, and notes. Even in its unfinished state, it was alive, it was genius. And in that moment, staring at the evidence of a talent he would never possess, something inside Marcus snapped. The slow-burning envy, the constant pressure, the fear of disappointing his father, it all coalesced into a single, cold point of malicious clarity. If he couldn't build a greater legacy, he would tear Ethan's down. He wouldn't just win, he would annihilate the competition. His mind began to work, not as an architect of buildings, but as an architect of ruin. He started to see the path, a blueprint for betrayal that was both simple and devastating. All it required was access, opportunity, and the exploitation of the one thing that was Ethan's greatest strength and most fatal flaw, his trust. The deadline for the showcase was announced. 3 weeks. The campus became a hive of frantic energy. Ethan, wounded by Bella's doubt but undeterred, retreated further into his work. He was so close to finishing his masterpiece, so focused on the final details, that he didn't notice the growing distance in Bella's eyes. He didn't notice the way Marcus now watched him, no longer with envy, but with the patient, predatory gaze of a spider watching a fly. A week before the deadline, Marcus approached him in the studio, a friendly, concerned smile plastered on his face. "Man, you look wrecked," he said, gesturing to Ethan's tired face. "You've been pulling all-nighters for a month. We need to get you out of here. A few of us are grabbing a drink tonight at the Draftsman, to celebrate being in the home stretch. You have to come, just for an hour." Ethan hesitated, his mind still on a tricky structural equation. "I don't know, Marcus. I'm so close to the end." "That's why you need a break," Marcus insisted, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "1 hour, for your sanity, for old time's sake. What do you say?" Ethan looked at his friend's smiling face, a face he had trusted for years. He saw concern, he saw friendship, he saw an escape, however brief, from the suffocating pressure. "Yeah," Ethan said, a tired smile finally breaking through. "Okay, 1 hour. It'll be good to feel normal again." Marcus's smile widened. "Perfect," he said. "It's all taken care of." And as Ethan turned back to his desk, oblivious, Marcus's smile held. But his eyes were as cold and hard as polished stone. The first piece of his new design had just been laid perfectly in place. The Draftsman was a haven, a small pub nestled in the old part of town where the wood was dark, the lighting was low, and the ghosts of 1,000 architectural dreams lined the walls in framed sketches. It was their place. Tonight, Marcus was the generous host, holding court at a round table in the corner. He was in his element, his laughter booming, his stories captivating. He kept the drinks flowing, especially for Ethan. For every 1 beer Marcus drank, he made sure Ethan had 2, sliding them across the worn oak table with a grin. To the home stretch, Marcus toasted, raising his glass. And to the future master architect, Ethan Hayes. The small group of students cheered, and Ethan, caught in the warm glow of friendship and alcohol, felt the knot of tension in his shoulders finally begin to loosen. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about cantilever loads or zoning regulations. He was just a college student, surrounded by friends, celebrating a victory he felt was within his grasp. The conversation was a comfortable blur of old jokes and shared memories, a curated highlight reel of their golden days. Marcus was the perfect director, steering the talk away from the showcase, keeping everything light, easy, and nostalgic. He made Ethan feel seen, celebrated, and for a moment, he forgot the pressure. He forgot the Vances and the Thorns and the weight of their legacies. "One more for the road," Marcus announced, returning from the bar with 2 small glasses of amber liquid, the bartender's special, for good luck. Ethan, his judgment already clouded, didn't question it. He clinked his glass against Marcus's and downed the shot. It burned, but it was a pleasant, warming fire that spread through him, making the edges of the room feel soft and distant. And then, the memory begins to fray. It unravels into disconnected fragments. The sound of Bella's name in a sentence he couldn't quite grasp. Marcus's arm around his shoulder, guiding him out into the cold night air. The promise of a cab. And then, nothing. Just a deep, dark, silent abyss. Light, painful, intrusive light, slicing through his eyelids. Ethan groaned, his head pounding with a rhythm that felt like a demolition crew was working inside his skull. The taste in his mouth was foul, and a wave of nausea rolled over him. He was in his own bed, the clothes from last night still on. He fumbled for his phone on the nightstand, his hand shaking. The screen lit up, 10:47 a.m. A cold, electric shock of pure panic jolted him awake, overriding the hangover. The deadline. The deadline was noon. He threw himself out of bed, his body screaming in protest, and scrambled to his desk. The computer was asleep. He woke it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to upload the final files. He opened the project folder, his breath catching in his throat. It was there, a single, consolidated file, labeled Hayes, Final, Submission. A wave of relief washed over him. He must have finished it when he got back last night. He didn't remember, but he must have. He opened the file to give it one last look before uploading, and the world stopped turning. The design on the screen was his, but it was wrong. It was like looking at a reflection in a warped mirror. The elegant, sweeping lines of his central structure had been straightened, made clunky. The innovative composite material he'd spent weeks researching had been replaced with standard concrete and steel. The intricate, humane details of the living spaces were gone, replaced by a cold, blocky functionality. It was his creation, lobotomized. It was a failure. Panic turned to icy dread. He frantically checked the file's metadata. Last modified, 3:12 a.m. Submitted, 3:15 a.m. Submitted. The word was a death sentence. He had no memory of it. None. Had he been so drunk, so utterly out of his mind, that he had butchered his own masterpiece, his soul's work, and then sent it off to be judged? The shame was a physical thing, so heavy he could barely breathe. While Ethan's world was imploding, the real story had played out hours earlier in the dead of night. Bella, unable to sleep, had felt a growing unease. Ethan wasn't back. He wasn't answering his phone. At 2:30 a.m., she'd thrown on a coat and walked the cold, silent blocks to the architecture studio, thinking maybe he'd gone back there. She found the studio dark, except for a single pool of light illuminating one workstation, Ethan's workstation. And sitting in Ethan's chair, his face cast in the pale glow of the monitor, was Marcus. He was typing furiously, his movements precise and methodical. He didn't look like a friend checking on a project. He looked like a saboteur. "Marcus?" she whispered. He jumped, spinning around in the chair, his eyes wide with a flicker of panic that he quickly masked. "Bella, what are you doing here? I was looking for Ethan. What are you doing?" she asked, walking closer. Her eyes fell on the screen. She saw Ethan's design, but then Marcus clicked a window, and she saw another, nearly identical design right beside it. Marcus's name was in the title bar of the second one. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. "What have you done?" she breathed, the words barely audible. Marcus stood up slowly. The charming mask was gone. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "I've done what needed to be done," he said, his voice low. "I'm securing our future, Bella, the one our families have planned for us. By stealing Ethan's work, by destroying him," she cried, her voice trembling with disbelief and horror. "He was going to win, Bella. And then what? He would have taken you away to some non-profit somewhere, building mud huts and living on a grant. Is that the life you want? Is that the legacy you want for your children?" He stepped closer, his voice becoming a hypnotic, poisonous whisper. "My design will win. Thorn Industries will flourish. The Vance Thorn Alliance will be the most powerful in the state. We can have it all. Everything your mother wants for you. Everything you deserve. Him or this. You have to choose." He didn't need to say more. He had laid out the two paths with brutal clarity. One was a path of love, but it was uncertain, fraught with struggle, and led to a world her family would despise. The other was a path of power, of legacy, of security. It was everything she had been raised to value. It was a gilded cage, but it was safe. Tears streamed down her face as her heart broke. She looked at the screen, at the stolen brilliance of the man she loved, and then at the cold, determined face of the man offering her the world. And in the terrible silence of the empty studio, she made her choice. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, leaving him to finish his work. Her silence was his consent. Back in Ethan's room, the doorknob turned. Bella entered, her face a carefully constructed mask of gentle concern. She looked like she'd been crying. "Ethan, oh my God," she said, rushing to his side as he sat staring blankly at the screen. "I was so worried. You didn't come home." "Bella," he croaked, his voice raw, "look, my project, I don't understand. It's ruined. I submitted it, and I don't remember doing it." He looked at her, his eyes begging for an answer, for a reprieve from this waking nightmare. This was her moment. The lie, when it came, was terrifyingly perfect. She knelt beside him, taking his hand. Her touch felt cold. "Honey, you were so drunk last night," she said, her voice soft and full of pity. "You were a mess. When Marcus finally got you home, you kept saying your project wasn't good enough, that you were going to fail. You were panicking." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You pushed us away. You locked yourself in here and said you had to fix it. I tried to stop you. We both did. But you wouldn't listen. You worked for hours. Don't you remember any of it?" He searched the black hole of his memory, but found nothing. Her story was a script, and his mind was a blank page for her to write on. It made a horrible, sickening kind of sense. His panic, his insecurity, the blackout drinking. I did this," he whispered, the question a final, desperate plea for denial. Bella looked at him, her eyes brimming with fresh, false tears. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she said, wrapping her arms around him. It wasn't an embrace of comfort. It was the final act of the betrayal, a cage of lies closing around him. He didn't feel the warmth of her body. He only felt the crushing, absolute certainty that he, and he alone, was the architect of his own destruction. The official summons arrived 2 days later. It was not a letter. It was a verdict delivered before the trial had even begun. The envelope was thick, the university's crest embossed in a severe, unforgiving black. It commanded his presence before the Northwood Academic Integrity Board to answer for a Level 1 infraction: plagiarism with intent to deceive. The hearing was to be held in the Sterling Hall boardroom, a chamber reserved not for education, but for executions. Ethan walked into the room, and the temperature seemed to drop. It was a cavern of dark wood and darker intentions. A long, polished mahogany table stretched across its length, and behind it sat the board, 5 tenured professors, and the dean of architecture, their faces impassive, judicial masks. On the right side of the room sat Marcus, dressed in a somber, perfectly tailored suit. Beside him was his father, Richard Thorne, a man whose quiet presence radiated an intimidating aura of power. Across from them sat Bella and her mother, Eleanor. Bella stared at her hands, the picture of a grieving witness, while Eleanor's posture was ramrod straight, her expression one of grim, righteous duty. The power in the room was a tangible force, and it was all aligned against him. He was seated alone at a small table in the center of the floor, a defendant in the stocks. Dean Albright began, his voice devoid of any warmth. He laid out the facts of the case. He presented the two designs on a large screen for the board to see. First, Marcus's. It was elegant, innovative, a clear contender for the Aspire Award. Then, he showed Ethan's. It was a clumsy, almost brutish imitation. The similarities were obvious. The inferiority of Ethan's version was glaring. And then, the dean said, his voice heavy with manufactured gravity, we have the submission timestamps. Mr. Thorne's final project was uploaded to the university server at 2:58 a.m. Mr. Hayes's project was uploaded 17 minutes later at 3:15 a.m. He let the information hang in the air. 17 minutes. In the context he had created, it was an eternity, more than enough time for a desperate student to see a superior project, panic, and clumsily attempt to copy it. Marcus was called to speak first. He rose, his demeanor a perfect blend of confidence and sorrow. He was not a gloating victor, but a wounded friend. I still can't believe it, he began, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan is my best friend. He's a genius. I never thought he was capable of this. He then walked the board through his design, Ethan's design, with a chilling fluency. He spoke of its philosophy, its innovative use of space, its core principles. He had studied Ethan's notes, memorized his passions, and now he was wearing them like a costume. He spoke of the final night, of his concern for Ethan's drinking, of his shock the next day when a professor had called him, asking about the unfortunate similarities between the two projects. I feel betrayed, Marcus concluded, looking directly at Ethan, a single perfect tear tracing a path down his cheek. But more than that, I feel sorry for him. The pressure must have been too much. He sat down to the sympathetic murmurs of the board. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It was a masterful performance. Then, it was Ethan's turn. He stood, his hands trembling slightly. He hadn't slept. He had replayed the last few days in his mind 1,000 times, searching for a truth that remained just out of reach. This is a mistake, he began, his voice hoarse. That design, the one Marcus just presented, it's mine. The concepts, the sketches, the calculations, they are mine. He tried to explain his work, but his words were a jumble of passion and desperation. He talked about the blackout, about the missing hours, about his project being sabotaged. I don't remember submitting it, he pleaded, looking from one stony face to the next. I woke up, and it was corrupted. It wasn't my work anymore. From the corner of his eye, he saw Eleanor Vance shake her head with a look of theatrical pity. The board was unmoved. His story sounded like what it was, the frantic, unbelievable tale of a guilty man. Mr. Hayes, one professor asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Are you suggesting that someone broke into your room, altered your project into an inferior version of Mr. Thorne's, and submitted it on your behalf, all without your knowledge? Put like that? It sounded insane. I don't know how, Ethan stammered. I just know what I made, and it wasn't that. Then we call our final witness, Dean Albright said, his voice flat. Miss Isabella Vance. A hush fell over the room as Bella rose, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She walked to the witness chair as if she were walking to her own execution, avoiding Ethan's desperate gaze. Eleanor gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Miss Vance, the dean began gently, you were with Mr. Hayes on the night in question. Can you please tell the board what you observed? Bella took a shaky breath. Ethan, he wasn't himself, she started, her voice a fragile whisper. He was under so much pressure. For weeks, he kept saying he wasn't good enough, that his design was failing. She looked at Ethan then, her eyes full of a sorrow that was so perfectly rendered, it had to be a lie. That night, he drank too much. We were all worried. He was frantic. He said he was going to lose, that he had to start over. He locked himself in his room. He said he needed to fix it. I begged him to just get some sleep, to submit what he had. But he wouldn't listen. He said he knew how to make it better. Every word was a hammer blow, driving the final nails into his coffin. She had taken his deepest insecurities, the ones he had only ever confessed to her, and twisted them into a confession of guilt. He had trusted her with his fears, and she was now using them as a weapon to destroy him. He wanted to scream, to call her a liar, but no sound would come out. He was paralyzed by the sheer, cold-blooded artistry of her betrayal. He had been right. He was in a nightmare. But the monster wasn't his memory. It was the woman he loved. "Thank you, Miss Vance," the dean said softly. "That will be all." Bella walked back to her seat, collapsing into her mother's waiting embrace. The board exchanged knowing glances. The story was complete. The deliberation was a formality, lasting less than 5 minutes. Dean Albright cleared his throat and looked directly at Ethan, his face a mask of stern disappointment. "In light of the evidence and the corroborating testimony, the board finds that you, Ethan Hayes, have committed a flagrant violation of the Northwood University Code of Academic Integrity. Your scholarship is revoked. Your academic record is voided. Your expulsion is effective immediately. You have 1 hour to vacate university housing." The words were like bullets, each one finding its mark, extinguishing a part of him. Expulsion, voided, vacate. He felt nothing. A profound, hollow numbness had replaced the panic and the pain. He vaguely registered Eleanor Vance's thin, triumphant smile. He saw Marcus look down, feigning humility and victory. He saw Bella hidden in her mother's arms, her betrayal now absolute. 2 campus security officers escorted him from the room. They walked him to his dorm, a place that had been his home, his sanctuary. Now it was just a room. He moved mechanically, pulling a single cardboard box from his closet. He filled it with the few things that mattered: a worn copy of a book on structural engineering, a photo of his parents, a handful of his best sketches from his first-year sketches from before Bella, before Marcus. He walked out of the building and into the bright, cold afternoon. The campus was alive. Students were laughing on the lawn, throwing frisbees, rushing to their next class. They were living the life that had just been stolen from him. He walked the long path across the quad, the box heavy in his arms, his steps feeling impossibly slow. Every face he passed seemed to stare, to whisper. He was a pariah, an outcast. He reached the massive, wrought-iron gates of the university. He didn't look back. There was nothing left for him there. As he stepped out onto the public street, leaving the world of Northwood behind forever, the numbness finally began to recede, replaced by a single, cold, and utterly clear thought. He would not forget, and one day he would return. The bus ride home was a journey through a landscape of ghosts. Every passing town, every empty field, was a reminder of the life he was supposed to be leaving behind, not returning to. He had left this world 2 years ago on a similar bus, his chest tight with ambition and the thrilling fear of the unknown. He was returning in a state of quiet disgrace, with a single cardboard box and the crushing weight of a future that had been stolen. His hometown hadn't changed. It was a place of modest homes, of smokestacks that painted the horizon, a perpetual gray, a town built on the sweat and resilience of people who didn't have the luxury of dreaming about legacies. It was his home, but it felt like a foreign country. The reunion with his parents was a study in unspoken grief. There were no accusations, no angry shouts. There was only a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with disappointment. His father, a man whose hands were permanently calloused from a lifetime of factory work, looked at his son's soft, unblemished hands, and then looked away, his shame for his son palpable. His mother tried to be comforting, but her fluttering gestures and a constant, watery-eyed worry only made it worse. They had sacrificed for him, bragging to neighbors and relatives about their brilliant boy at the fancy university. Now, he was back, a failure, and they didn't know why. He tried to explain it once. He spoke of Marcus, of Bella, of the stolen project, but the story came out weak and convoluted, the desperate, unbelievable excuse of a guilty man. He saw the doubt in their eyes, the quiet pity that said they loved him, but they didn't believe him, so he stopped trying. He retreated into the silence they had all created, a silence that confirmed their fears and sealed his isolation. His childhood bedroom became his prison cell. The walls were a museum of a dead life. Architectural sketches he had drawn in high school, full of a naive, boundless optimism. Textbooks from Northwood that he couldn't bring himself to open. A photograph of him, Bella and Marcus, taken on a sunny day, their arms around each other, their smiles so wide and genuine, it felt like a physical assault to look at it. He took the photograph and buried it at the bottom of his box. He spent his days in a fog of depression, the hours bleeding into one another without distinction. Sleep was a temporary escape, but he would wake with a jolt, the memory of the tribunal, of Bella's face, crashing down on him anew. He was a ghost in his own home, the echo of a promise that had been broken. But the world, indifferent to his pain, kept turning. Bills arrived. The refrigerator needed filling. The unspoken pressure to contribute, to do something, became its own kind of torture. He started looking for work, but his resume was a joke. 2 years at a prestigious university, ending in an expulsion for academic fraud. No one would touch him. The shame of each rejection was a fresh layer of salt on the wound. Finally, he found a job. It was through a temp agency that didn't ask too many questions. A construction site on the edge of town, where a new commercial plaza was being built. The irony was a cruel, cosmic joke. The man who had once designed buildings was now building them, one cinder block, one bag of cement at a time. The work was brutal. His body, accustomed to the soft life of a student, screamed in protest. His muscles ached with a fire he had never known. His hands, which had once moved with delicate precision across a drafting board, were now raw, blistered, and cracked. But the physical pain was a dull anesthetic compared to the torment in his mind. Every day, he would see the site form and unroll the official blueprints, and a searing jealousy would rip through him. He would watch the architects arrive in their clean cars, pointing and directing, their faces full of the purpose and authority he had lost. He was invisible to them, just another faceless laborer in a hard hat. He learned to hate the sun for the way it baked the dirt. He learned to hate the rain for the way it turned the site into a pit of thick, cloying mud. He learned to hate the sound of his own breathing, a constant reminder that he was still alive in this joyless existence. Rock bottom was not a sudden, dramatic crash. It was a slow, grinding descent. It arrived on a Tuesday, in the middle of a cold, relentless downpour. He was hauling a wheelbarrow of wet concrete, his boots sinking into the mud, his clothes soaked through. He slipped. The wheelbarrow tipped, spilling its gray, sloppy contents across the foundation. His supervisor, a large man with a perpetually angry face, stormed over. "Hayes, what the hell do you think you're doing? That's the 3rd time this week. You're useless. Get out of here. Go home. Don't come back tomorrow." The other workers stared, their faces blank. The words, simple and harsh, broke through the fog of Ethan's depression. Useless. He had been called a genius, a visionary, a fraud, a failure, but useless. That was new. That was a final damning verdict on his existence. He didn't say a word. He dropped the handles of the wheelbarrow and walked off the site, the foreman's shouts fading behind him. He walked for hours in the rain, with no destination in mind, the water washing the mud from his clothes, but not the filth from his soul. He found himself standing on an old, rusted railway bridge, overlooking the murky, churning river that cut through the town. He looked down at the dark water. It promised a different kind of silence. A final silence. The silence of the end. He thought of his parents' disappointed faces. He thought of Marcus's triumphant smile. And he thought of Bella, her beautiful, lying eyes full of false tears. They had taken everything from him. His future, his name, his love, his passion. All that was left was this empty shell of a man, standing on a bridge in the rain. And in that moment, he felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. The fire was out. He had lost. He eventually turned away from the bridge and walked home, a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. That night, his mother asked him to clear out some old boxes from the attic to make space. It was a chore, a distraction. He moved with the slow, deliberate motions of an old man. In the corner, under a dusty canvas sheet, was his first computer. An old beige tower from a decade ago. On a whim, he carried it down to his room, plugged it in, and hit the power button. The machine whirred and groaned, but it came to life, the screen flickering with a pale blue light. He sat there, staring at the familiar, archaic operating system. He opened a command prompt, the screen turning a stark, simple black, a blinking white cursor, its only feature. It was a void, but it was a clean void. A world of pure logic. A world where rules were absolute. If X, then Y. No betrayal, no lies, no legacy. He rested his fingers on the keyboard. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't thinking about a new career. He was just doing something. His fingers, stiff and calloused from a job he no longer had, moved slowly. He typed a single, simple command. The first one every programmer learns. Print, hello world. He hit enter. On the dark screen, the words appeared, white and clear. Hello world. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a sign of hope, but it was a response. In the crushing, absolute silence of his ruined life, something had finally answered back. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan Hayes felt the faintest flicker of a spark in the overwhelming dark. The words, hello, world, glowed in the darkness of the room. It was not a greeting, it was an affirmation. In a world that had erased him, he had just created something that existed. It was a tiny, insignificant act, but it was his. The blinking cursor that followed was a question, an invitation into a world governed not by influence and lies, but by pure, unyielding logic. Ethan accepted. The months that followed were a descent into a new kind of madness, a focused, productive insanity. He did not emerge from his depression, he repurposed it. The pain, the shame, the searing memory of the betrayal, he took all of it and converted it into a cold, clean fuel. His childhood bedroom, once a prison cell of despair, became a cocoon. He devoured information with a desperate hunger, spending his days at the public library, reading everything he could find on programming languages, network architecture, and cryptography. At night, he would return to the hum of his old computer and apply what he'd learned, typing lines of code until the sun began to tint the gray sky of his hometown. His parents watched with a quiet, worried confusion. Their son had traded a silent, brooding despair for a silent, obsessive focus. They didn't understand what he was doing, but he was no longer a ghost. He was an engine, running on something they couldn't see. His architect's mind, trained to see systems, foundations, and load-bearing structures, began to see the digital world in the same way. He saw the beauty in the elegant flow of data, but more importantly, he saw the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, the cracks in the digital foundations of modern life. He saw how easily information could be stolen, corrupted, and used to destroy someone. He knew that better than anyone. That was the genesis of the idea. It wasn't a flash of inspiration. It was a slow, dawning realization. The world needed stronger walls, better shields. It was on his 25th birthday, 2 years after the expulsion, that he packed his belongings into 2 duffel bags, sold the old car his father had given him, and used the few $1,000s to rent a cramped, windowless apartment with a small, crumbling garage. On a piece of paper, he wrote the name of his new one-man company. He called it Phoenix Systems. It was a vow. He was not just rebuilding. He was being reborn from the ashes of the boy they had burned. The next few years were a blur of struggle. Life was stripped down to its barest essentials: code, sleep, and cheap instant noodles. The garage was his entire world. It was cold in the winter, suffocating in the summer, and always smelled of damp concrete and ozone. He salvaged better computer parts from electronic waste depots, building his servers by hand. He lived like a monk, his only human contact, the occasional, suspicious glance from a neighbor. He poured every waking hour into his project, a revolutionary new form of data encryption. He was building a digital fortress, a vault so secure it would be virtually unbreakable. Isolation was his shield. The memory of the tribunal was his whip. There were moments of near defeat. A power surge once fried his main server, wiping out 6 months of work in a single, sickening crackle of electricity. He sat in the silent, darkened garage, the smell of burnt circuits filling the air, and for the first time since that day on the bridge, he felt the familiar, cold tendrils of despair. He almost gave up, but then he closed his eyes, and he saw them. He saw Marcus's fake tear. He saw Bella's practiced pity. He saw Eleanor Vance's triumphant smile, and the despair curdled into a white-hot, silent rage. He spent the next 72 hours without sleep, rewriting the lost code from memory, making it stronger, leaner, and more elegant than it had been before. The setback had become a catalyst. He named his encryption algorithm Aegis, after the mythical shield of the gods. It was his shield, a manifestation of his vow to never be vulnerable again. He started small, taking on freelance security jobs for tiny companies, using his own algorithm to protect their data. His work was flawless. Word began to spread in the underground forums and niche tech communities where true talent is recognized. He was a ghost, a programmer known only by the username Architect, whose code was as beautiful as it was unbreakable. His first major client was a mid-level financial firm that had been crippled by a data breach. He worked for 3 months, rebuilding their entire digital infrastructure around the Aegis system. When he was done, their security was the strongest in their sector. That success led to another, larger client, and then another. The years began to accelerate. Phoenix Systems grew from a one-man operation in a garage to a small team in a rented office space. Ethan hired his employees remotely, interviewing them through encrypted text-based chats. They never saw his face or heard his voice. He was the Phantom CEO, a living legend within his own company, known only for his brilliant code and his obsessive demand for perfection. He was building an empire, brick by digital brick. The breakthrough that catapulted him from success to stratospheric wealth came from the most unlikely of places. A federal agency, tasked with protecting the nation's most sensitive infrastructure data, was facing a new generation of sophisticated cyber threats. They put out a challenge to the world's top security firms: try to breach their prototype system. Dozens of major corporations tried and failed. On the final day of the challenge, from an anonymous IP address, someone not only breached the system, they took it apart, identified 3 fundamental flaws in its core architecture, and left behind a single file containing the solution to fix them. The solution was the Aegis algorithm. The government, stunned and impressed, launched a quiet, high-level search for the mysterious Architect. When they found him, they didn't find a corporation. They found Phoenix Systems. Negotiations were swift and secret. The deal was one of the largest technology contracts in government history, a multi-billion-dollar agreement to implement the Aegis system across all critical national infrastructure. Overnight, Phoenix Systems became a global titan, and Ethan Hayes, the boy who had been expelled for cheating, the man who had been fired from a construction site for being useless, became a billionaire. The story ends and begins again, 20 years after the expulsion. Ethan Hayes stands in his office, a minimalist sanctuary of glass and steel at the top of a skyscraper that his wealth could have built 100 times over. He has achieved a level of success and security that borders on the absolute. He is powerful, he is untouchable, he has won. But as he looks out at the sprawling city below, a universe of lights and lives, he feels no joy. The victory is as silent and empty as the office around him. He built his fortress to keep the world out, to protect himself from ever being hurt again. But the ghosts of his past were already inside. The money, the power, the company, they were never the goal. They were simply the tools. The ammunition for a war that he had been silently planning for 2 decades. And he had just received his invitation to the final battle. While Ethan Hayes was forging an empire from logic and silence, the victors of his old life were discovering that their prize was poison. To the outside world, Marcus and Isabella Thorne were the pinnacle of success, a golden couple whose lives were as perfectly constructed as the legacy buildings that bore the Thorne family name. They lived in a sprawling, modernist mansion of glass and stone that clung to a hillside overlooking the city, a home that had been featured in architectural magazines. They had a daughter, Lily, a bright, beautiful child who was the unwitting centerpiece of their carefully curated family portrait. They chaired the most exclusive charity galas. Their names were etched onto the donor plaques of museums and theaters, and their smiles, captured by society photographers, were flawless. It was a perfect life built on a foundation of rot. The performance was exhausting. One evening, after a hospital benefit gala, the facade crumbled the moment the doors of their Rolls-Royce closed, shutting out the world. The practiced smiles vanished. Marcus loosened his bow tie with a sharp, angry tug. Bella stared out the window, the city lights blurring into meaningless streaks of color. The silence in the car was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, heavy with the weight of 20 years of unspoken truths. "Did you hear what Franklin said tonight?" Marcus finally spat, his voice sharp. He asked when Thorne Industries was going to get back to innovating instead of just building glorified shopping malls. "Maybe you should have an answer for him then," Bella replied, her voice glacially calm, not bothering to look at him. "It's hard to innovate when our profit margins are thinner than paper, and the bank is calling me every other day," he shot back. "This is your fault. That ridiculous gala you insisted we fund. $250,000 we don't have. Just so you can play queen of the socialites." "Oh, so it's my fault the company your father built into an institution is now sinking under your command?" she retorted, turning to face him, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. "Don't you dare. You wanted this life. You chose this. So you will play your part." The argument died there, as it always did, choked by the one name they could never speak: Ethan. His ghost was the silent third passenger in the car, a constant witness to the decay of their victory. Back in their cold, minimalist mansion, they retreated to their separate corners of the gilded cage. Marcus went to his office, a room that was a monument to his imposter syndrome. On the walls hung framed photos of his father and grandfather, their stern, successful faces a constant, silent judgment. He poured a heavy glass of scotch and slumped into his leather chair, staring at the bleak financial projections on his monitor. Thorne Industries was bleeding. Marcus was a competent manager, a passable schmoozer, but he was not a visionary. He had no spark. He had spent his career polishing and repackaging the ideas of others, a skill that could only sustain an empire for so long. The great lie of his life had hollowed him out. He had won the Aspire Award with Ethan's work, a triumph that had launched his career. But every building he had designed since felt like a pale, clumsy imitation. He would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, the dream always the same. He is on a stage, being asked to explain his award-winning design, and he has forgotten all the notes he memorized. The fear of being exposed as a fraud was a cancer that had metastasized over 2 decades, corrupting every success, poisoning every moment of peace. Bella's prison was more opulent, but no less confining. She walked down the long, silent hallway to her daughter's room. She stood in the doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of Lily's chest in the soft glow of a nightlight. This was the only real thing in her life. Her love for her daughter was a fierce, desperate anchor in a sea of artifice. But even here, the guilt was a constant companion. She saw Ethan's passion in Lily's intense focus when she drew. She heard Ethan's idealism in her daughter's simple, honest questions about the world. She was terrified that Lily would inherit her father's integrity and her mother's weakness. Her days were a meticulously scheduled series of empty rituals. Pilates classes, lunch with other wealthy wives, committee meetings for charities she cared little about. She was living the life her mother had designed for her, a life of security and status, and she had never felt more insecure or more insignificant. Sometimes, in the quiet of the afternoon, a memory would ambush her. Ethan, laughing, his face smudged with charcoal as they worked late in the studio. The simple, uncomplicated feeling of his hand in hers. The way he talked about the future, a future filled with light and purpose. She had traded that for this beautiful, empty house and a marriage held together by a shared crime. She had made her choice, and she was living out her life sentence. Later that night, the Cold War between them reignited. Bella found Marcus in his office, a half-empty bottle of scotch on his desk. "Your father would be so proud," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Marcus looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Leave it, Bella." "No," she said, stepping into the room. "I'm tired of this, tired of pretending. We have this enormous house, and we live in it like two ghosts. Our marriage is a business arrangement." "Was it worth it, Marcus? Was destroying him worth this?" "You stood right there and let it happen," he roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "You made your choice just like I made mine. Don't you dare try to pin it all on me now. You wanted the Vance Thorne legacy, and you got it." "I wanted a life," she screamed back, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "Not this performance. Not a husband who is a shell of a man, terrified that someone is going to find out he's been a fraud his entire life." The word hung in the air between them. Fraud. It was the truth, and it was the one thing they could never say. The fight drained out of them, leaving behind the familiar, bitter residue of resentment. Marcus slumped back in his chair, defeated. His gaze fell upon a financial journal open on his desk. He'd been reading it before the gala. "It doesn't matter anyway," he said, his voice a low mutter. "The world is changing. Our kind of power, it's becoming obsolete." Bella followed his gaze. The article was a profile on the explosive growth of a company called Phoenix Systems. It spoke of a new era of power, one built on data, technology, and information. It was run by a mysterious, reclusive CEO who had never been photographed, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from nothing. The name of the man was not mentioned. It didn't need to be. For Marcus and Bella, the article was a chilling prophecy. Their world, built on old money and secrets, felt fragile, brittle. A new kind of titan was rising, one whose power was invisible, absolute, and utterly foreign to them. They ended the night, as they always did, in separate wings of the mansion, surrounded by a fortune that could buy them anything but peace, tormented by the ghost of a man they thought they had erased. They didn't know it yet, but the architect of that new world was the same one whose life they had demolished. And he was about to make a bid to acquire their crumbling kingdom. 20 years is a long time. It's long enough for a university's prestige to tarnish, for its endowments to shrink, and for the sharp edges of old scandals to be worn smooth by institutional memory. At Northwood University, the name Ethan Hayes, if it was remembered at all, was a ghost in a dusty archive file, a footnote in a long-closed disciplinary case. The current administration, led by a new president named Dr. Alistair Finch, was facing a crisis. The once lauded School of Architecture, the jewel in Northwood's crown, was crumbling literally. Its flagship building was outdated, its technology was archaic, and it was hemorrhaging top-tier faculty and students to rival institutions with gleaming new facilities. Northwood was desperate. In the polished, mahogany-paneled office of the university's fundraising department, a team of researchers was engaged in a digital gold rush, scouring alumni databases for a savior. They were looking for a whale, a donor so wealthy they could single-handedly fund the construction of a new, state-of-the-art architecture school. A junior analyst named Sarah was running cross-references between their alumni lists and global wealth indexes. Mostly, she found dead ends. Then, she got a hit. The name was Ethan Hayes. According to the digital record, he had been a student in the architecture program for 2 years before withdrawing for unspecified reasons. The record was sparse. But when she cross-referenced the name with the CEO of Phoenix Systems, the reclusive, phantom-like billionaire, the system flagged a potential match. It was a long shot. A student who never even graduated. But the potential payout was too massive to ignore. The campaign to reach Ethan Hayes began. It was like trying to send a letter to a man on the moon. Formal emails sent to the General Counsel of Phoenix Systems were answered with polite, impenetrable rejections from an anonymous legal department. A multi-million-dollar donation request, sent via courier to the company's gleaming headquarters, was returned unopened a week later. The walls Ethan had built around himself were not just high, they were absolute. He was a fortress, and Northwood's pleas were bouncing off the ramparts. Dr. Finch was on the verge of abandoning the effort when he decided on one last, desperate approach. He requested Ethan Hayes's original physical student file from the university archives. Buried deep within the transcript and admissions essay, he found a small, personal detail. In his application essay, a teenage Ethan had written with incredible passion about an obscure, early 20th century architectural theorist named Julian Croft, a man who believed buildings should be designed to evolve with the lives of the people inside them. It was a detail only the real Ethan Hayes would recognize. Finch dismissed his secretary and, with his own hands, penned a letter on his personal stationery. He didn't write to the billionaire CEO. He wrote to the student. He spoke of the current struggles of the architecture school. He mentioned Julian Croft and how Northwood had lost sight of his revolutionary ideals. He lamented that the school no longer had the resources to nurture students with the kind of vision that Ethan Hayes had once shown. He wasn't just asking for money. He was appealing to a shared ideal, a ghost of a dream. He sealed the letter and sent it, not to the corporate headquarters, but to a private P.O. box his researchers had linked, with low confidence, to Phoenix Systems' inner circle. It felt like placing a message in a bottle and tossing it into the ocean. In Ethan's silent, panoramic office, his executive assistant, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman named Evelyn, who had been with him for 15 years, placed the letter on his desk. She was the final gatekeeper, the guardian of his solitude. She culled 99% of his mail. This one she had almost discarded, but the personal, handwritten address and the university crest had made her pause. Ethan picked it up. He recognized the Northwood seal instantly. It was the same seal that had been on the letter that had destroyed his life. He opened it and read Finch's carefully crafted words. His face remained a placid mask, utterly unreadable. Evelyn, watching him, expected him to drop it into the desktop shredder, as he did with all such unsolicited appeals. He did not. He read the letter a second time, his eyes lingering on the name Julian Croft. A ghost of a memory of him debating Croft's theories with a professor flashed through his mind. A small, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in his jaw. This was the moment. The culmination of a 20-year silent war he had been waging. He had been waiting for this. He had not just been building his company, he had been watching them. Through anonymous shell corporations, he had shorted the stock of companies run by Northwood's chief donors. Through charitable foundations he secretly controlled, he had poured funding into the architecture programs of Northwood's chief rivals, luring away their best professors and brightest students. He had watched their financial reports, their enrollment numbers, their declining prestige. He had not simply waited for them to become desperate. He had, with the surgical precision of a master strategist, helped engineer their desperation. They thought they were reaching out to him. In reality, he had been summoning them all along. Dr. Finch's letter wasn't a long shot. It was an inevitability. It was a piece on a chessboard, moving exactly where Ethan had always known it would. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet but resonating with an authority that could shake markets. His assistant, who was already turning to leave, stopped dead. "Yes, Mr. Hayes. Get me Dr. Finch at Northwood University on a secure line," he instructed, his eyes still fixed on the letter. Evelyn's composure, for the first time in a decade, cracked. She stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. Mr. Hayes did not take calls. He did not attend meetings. He did not engage with the outside world. This was not just a change in protocol, it was a seismic shift. "And Evelyn," he added, as she began to move, her mind racing, "tell him, I am very interested in discussing the future of the architecture school. Tell him, I have a few ideas for a new building." He placed the letter down, perfectly centered on his desk. He looked out the window at the city below, a sprawling testament to the power of architects and builders. For 20 years, he had been an architect of the intangible, building walls of code and fortresses of wealth. Now, he was going to build something real. A monument, a courthouse, a tomb. The ghost was not just coming back to haunt the house, he was coming back to redesign it from the foundation up. The first meeting was not a meeting at all. It was an audience. Dr. Finch and the senior members of the Northwood board gathered in their stately boardroom, their faces a mixture of hope and raw nerves. A large monitor at the head of the table remained dark, a black mirror reflecting their anxious expressions. They were about to speak to a man no one had ever spoken to, a digital ghost who commanded a very real empire. At the appointed time, the screen flickered to life. It did not show a face. It showed the logo of Phoenix Systems, a stylized bird with wings of fire, glowing softly against a black background. A voice emerged from the speakers, calm, dispassionate, and digitally modulated to be devoid of any identifying characteristics. It was the voice of pure, anonymous power. "Good afternoon, Dr. Finch," the voice said. "I have reviewed the proposal for your new School of Architecture." Finch leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Mr. Hayes, on behalf of the entire university, I cannot thank you enough for your time. Your proposal," the voice continued, cutting through the pleasantries, "is inadequate. You are asking for a new building. What you need is a new legacy." A collective, confused silence fell over the boardroom. "I am prepared," the voice stated, "to make a one-time, single donation of $500 million. The air left the room. 500 million. It was a number so vast, so far beyond their wildest dreams, it seemed unreal. Finch was speechless, his mouth agape. A board member let out an audible gasp. They had come asking for a lifeboat. He had offered them an entire naval fleet. This donation, the voice went on, the calm, even tone making the astronomical sum seem all the more staggering, will be contingent upon a set of non-negotiable conditions. "Doctor," Finch found his voice, stumbling over the words. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. Anything. The university is prepared to be very flexible." "There will be no flexibility," the voice corrected. "There will only be acceptance. Condition 1. The new school will be designed by an architect of my choosing. It will be a monument to innovation, and it will be named the Hayes Center for Academic Integrity and Innovation." A murmur went through the room. Integrity. The word was a dissonant note in the symphony of their elation. Finch cleared his throat. "A wonderful name, Mr. Hayes. Bold. Though, if I may, the integrity part is a bit unconventional. Our donors usually prefer to emphasize success or legacy. Academic integrity is the foundation upon which any institution of learning must be built," the voice stated, a new, cold edge to the modulated tone. "Without it, the entire structure is worthless. The name is not a suggestion." "Yes, of course," Finch said quickly, beads of sweat forming on his brow. The money was too important to risk on a semantic debate. "The Hayes Center for Academic Integrity and Innovation it is. Condition 2. The voice continued, seamlessly. "There will be a dedication ceremony and a fundraising gala to mark its opening. It is to be the single largest social and media event in this university's history. I will spare no expense." This was music to the board's ears. A massive party, underwritten by a billionaire, would be a fundraising bonanza, and Condition 3, the voice added. "The guests of honor at this gala are to be chosen by me. My office will provide a full list, and your invitations must be framed as a command performance from the university's primary benefactor. At the head of that list, to be seated at the main table, will be Mr. Marcus Thorne and his wife, Isabella, and Mrs. Eleanor Vance. As titans of industry and long-standing patrons of Northwood, it is crucial they are publicly honored for their family's profound and lasting impact on the university community." The board members exchanged pleased, knowing glances. This was brilliant. The mysterious Mr. Hayes was not just a generous donor, he was a savvy strategist. By honoring the old guard, the Thornes and the Vances, he was ensuring a smooth social transition, consolidating the support of the university's most powerful families. They saw it as a gesture of respect. They had no way of knowing it was a summons to a trial. "An excellent idea," Finch beamed. "They will be thrilled to be so honored." "I am certain they will be," the voice said, the digital modulation almost sounding like a sneer. Finally, the fourth and final condition. "I have, as you know, avoided any and all public appearances throughout my career. I intend to break that silence at this gala. Another shockwave hit the room. The public unveiling of the world's most reclusive billionaire on their campus, the media attention would be unprecedented. "I will be in attendance," the voice declared, "and I will deliver the keynote address. The contents of that address are mine alone. There will be no prior review of the speech by the university, and there will be no interruptions. You are providing me with a stage, and I will use it as I see fit. Is that understood?" "Understood, Mr. Hayes? It is a gift," Finch exclaimed, his voice trembling with excitement. "It would be the greatest honor in Northwood's history. It will be a historic night," the voice agreed. "My legal team will be in touch tomorrow to finalize the binding agreement. Do not disappoint me." The screen went black. The voice was gone. For a moment, the boardroom was silent, the occupants stunned into immobility. Then, it erupted. Cheers, laughter, handshakes. Champagne was called for. They had done it. They had saved Northwood. Their legacy was secure. They toasted their mysterious, eccentric, and unbelievably generous savior. They laughed about his strange, specific demands, dismissing them as the quirks of a genius who had lived too long in isolation. They were so blinded by the glare of $500 million that they couldn't see the perfect, elegant architecture of the trap they had just willingly entered. Miles away, in the silent apex of his skyscraper, Ethan Hayes terminated the connection. The modulated voice was gone, his own quiet breathing the only sound in the room. His face, illuminated by the glow of his monitor, was a mask of cold, patient satisfaction. The blueprint was now complete. For 20 years, they had believed he was a ghost, a forgotten footnote in their own triumphant story. They were about to learn that he was not the ghost, he was the architect, and he had just designed the perfect stage for their public demolition. On his screen was a complex flowchart, every variable accounted for. At the very end of the chart, a single box glowed. It read, "Checkmate." The night of the gala was a masterpiece of illusion. The new Hayes Center for Academic Integrity and Innovation was a breathtaking marvel of architecture, a symphony of glass, steel, and light that seemed to defy gravity. It was a building that Ethan Hayes, the student, would have wept with joy to design. It was everything Northwood had dreamed of and more. Inside, the grand dedication hall was filled with the glittering elite. Money, power, and influence mingled under soaring ceilings, their laughter echoing off polished marble floors, the sound of a world utterly convinced of its own permanence. Champagne flowed like water, and the flashes of cameras created a galaxy of man-made stars. The atmosphere was electric with celebration, but for 3 guests, it was the chilling prelude to an execution. Marcus, Isabella, and Eleanor Vance arrived not as guests, but as prisoners walking their last mile. They had no choice but to attend. To refuse the personal invitation of a $500 million donor, to snub the university they claimed to champion, would have been a social suicide, an admission of a guilt no one had yet publicly accused them of. Ethan's trap was not just a stage, it was a cage with no bars, held together by social pressure and the terror of exposure. They looked the part of the honored guests. Marcus in a bespoke tuxedo, his smile a rigid, desperate mask. Isabella, a vision in emerald silk, her beauty so pale and fragile she looked as if she might shatter. And Eleanor, a matriarch in midnight blue, her face a carving of aristocratic rage, her eyes scanning the crowd for the man who had dared to summon them. They were greeted with fawning deference by Dr. Finch, who guided them to their seats at the head table, a place of honor directly in front of the podium, a place with no escape. Every handshake, every polite smile, every word of congratulation they were forced to offer felt like a shovelful of dirt on their own graves. They were trapped, on display, and the architect of their doom had not yet even shown his face. Ethan's entrance was not an event, it was a change in the room's gravity. One moment he wasn't there, the next, he was. He appeared near the entrance, speaking quietly with his assistant, Evelyn. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, no different from dozens of other men in the room. But a hush fell in his immediate vicinity, a ripple of awareness spreading through the crowd. Whispers followed him. "Is that him? That's really him?" He was taller than they remembered, leaner. The boyish softness was gone, replaced by an unnerving stillness, a quiet intensity that seemed to draw all the light in the room towards him. He moved through the crowd with an easy, unhurried grace, the sea of power and wealth parting before him. Then he stopped. His eyes, calm and dark, scanned the room and found the head table. For a single, stretched-out moment, his gaze locked with theirs. It was not a look of anger or hatred. It was worse. It was a look of absolute, final clarity. It was the look of an architect reviewing a blueprint just before the demolition begins. In that silent, loaded glance, they understood. He was not there to gloat. He was there to close a ledger that had been open for 20 long years. Dr. Finch, oblivious to the silent declaration of war, stepped to the podium, his face beaming. He delivered a gushing, sycophantic introduction, praising the vision, the genius, and the staggering generosity of their benefactor. He called him a titan of industry, a true son of Northwood, and a man who was single-handedly launching the university into a new century of excellence. Finally, with a grand flourish, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it is the greatest honor of my life to present to you, for the very first time in public, Mr. Ethan Hayes." A storm of applause erupted as Ethan walked to the podium. He moved with the same deliberate calm, placing a single sheet of paper on the lectern before looking out at the sea of faces. The applause slowly faded into a dense, expectant silence. "Thank you, Dr. Finch," he began, his voice the same one from the conference call, but without the digital modulation. It was deeper now, richer, a calm baritone that filled the vast hall effortlessly. "Thank you all for being here. It is good to be back at Northwood." He paused, letting the simple words hang in the air. "When I offered to fund this center, I was asked about the name. Specifically, about the inclusion of the word integrity. It's a quiet word. It doesn't glitter like success or legacy. But integrity is the most important principle in architecture. It is the quality of being structurally sound. If the foundation lacks integrity, the most beautiful building will inevitably collapse." He looked toward the head table. The same is true of people, of institutions. A foundation of lies cannot support a legacy of truth. The crowd murmured, intrigued by his philosophical tone. Marcus's hand, resting on the table, was trembling. "This building," Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping the room again, "is also about innovation. It's about the future. But to build a new future, we must first be honest about the past. We must believe in second chances. And that reminds me of a story about a first chance. A story about a young student who walked these halls 2 decades ago. A hush fell. This was not the speech they were expecting. He was not born into a world of privilege, Ethan said, his voice becoming more intimate, a storyteller weaving a tale. He had no legacy to inherit. His only currency was his talent and a naive belief that hard work and honesty were all that mattered. He fell in love here. He forged what he thought were unbreakable friendships. He poured his entire soul into a single design, a project he believed was the first page of his future. Bella closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her perfectly powdered cheek. But on the eve of his success, Ethan's voice continued, steady and relentless. His future was stolen from him. It was stolen by the 2 people he trusted most in the world. His best friend, who coveted his talent, and the woman he loved, who chose a legacy of wealth over a future of integrity. They stole his work, framed him for the crime, and then stood by and watched as a board, influenced by the power and money of their families, expelled him in disgrace. The story was out now, a poison released into the glittering air of the gala. The wider audience was captivated, believing it to be a powerful, metaphorical anecdote. But at the head table, the world was ending. Marcus was ashen-faced, staring at Ethan as if he were a vengeful god. Eleanor's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "That student lost everything that day," Ethan said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing every person in the room into the vortex of his narrative. "He lost his name, his career, his faith in justice. They erased him. They threw him out into the cold and went on to build their perfect lives on the foundation of their perfect crime. They believed he was gone forever." He paused, The silence in the hall, now absolute, a perfect, crushing vacuum. He slowly raised his head, and his calm, dark eyes locked directly onto Marcus Thorne. They thought he was a ghost, Ethan finished, his voice now a quiet, chilling promise of the storm to come. They were wrong. The silence in the hall was a living thing, a predatory entity that swallowed the applause, the whispers, and the clinking of glasses whole. For a full 10 seconds, 1,000 people were frozen, their eyes darting from the calm, solitary figure at the podium to the 3 ashen faces at the head table. The story had been told. Now, the verdict was coming. Ethan's voice returned, still calm, still measured, but now it held the sharp, unforgiving edge of a scalpel. "A story, of course, is just words," he said. "And I was taught here at Northwood that a true architect must always show his work, so allow me to show you mine." Behind him, the massive screen that had been displaying the elegant logo of the new center went black. A moment later, a new image appeared. It was a computer's desktop, an older, dated interface from 2 decades ago. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. It was a digital ghost. "This," Ethan explained, his voice narrating the scene with cold precision, "is a forensic image of a hard drive I have kept for 20 years. Let's look at a file, shall we?" A cursor, controlled by Ethan from the podium, moved across the screen. It opened a folder labeled NSA Senior Project. Inside was a series of design files. "Here is the final concept for a sustainable, modular urban housing unit," Ethan said, as the brilliant, revolutionary design filled the screen. "And here," he continued, clicking on the file's properties, "is the metadata, the digital fingerprint. Last modified 2 weeks before the submission deadline. The proof, stark and undeniable in black and white, hung in the air." He then opened another file, a video capture of the Northwood submission portal from that year. It showed Marcus Thorne's submitted project. Ethan placed the 2 designs side by side on the screen. They were virtually identical. The theft was not an accusation, it was a visible, verifiable fact, exposed to the shocked eyes of their entire world. The whispers in the room became a roar. The flashes of cameras, once celebratory, were now a barrage of brutal, predatory light, all of it aimed at the head table. Marcus tried to stand, to say something, a strangled denial forming on his lips, but the sound died in his throat. He looked at the screen, at the ghost of the work he had stolen, and all the strength left his body. He collapsed back into his chair, a hollowed-out fraud, publicly executed. Eleanor Vance, for the first time in her life, looked powerless. Her iron composure shattered, revealing the frail, furious woman beneath. She was a queen whose subjects had just witnessed her utter nakedness, and Bella, simply broke. The tears were not the delicate, practiced drops of a performer. They were the racking, ugly sobs of a soul that had just been handed the bill for a 20-year-old debt. Ethan watched the chaos for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he turned his gaze to Dr. Finch and the university board, who were staring at him in abject horror. "This brings me," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the din, "to the primary purpose of the Hayes Center for Academic Integrity." He announced that his donation came with a final, legally binding codicil. The center would house a new, fully independent ethics committee. It would be funded by a blind trust, untouchable by the board, and would be granted the authority to investigate all claims of academic misconduct, past and present, with the power to retroactively revoke degrees. "Influence at Northwood," Ethan declared, "will no longer be a shield for the corrupt. The age of legacy over merit is over." He had not just exposed a crime. He had surgically removed the system that had allowed it to happen. Then, he turned his attention back to the wreckage at the head table, to Marcus. "You were always so concerned with legacies, Marcus," Ethan said, his voice now quiet, almost conversational, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. "A legacy, like a building, requires a sound foundation. And the foundation of your family's legacy has just been condemned." He paused, letting the weight of his final blow gather. "As of 6 o'clock this evening, my primary holding company, Phoenix Systems, finalized the acquisition of a controlling interest in the financially distressed Thorn Industries. A new shockwave of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Marcus's head snapped up, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending horror. He was not just a fraud, he was now an employee. As the new owner, Ethan stated, his voice as final as a judge's gavel, my first order of business will be to dissolve the current leadership and file for a complete corporate restructuring. We will protect the jobs of the thousands of employees your mismanagement has put at risk. But the Thorn family's control, the Thorn family's name, and the Thorn family's legacy are, as of tonight, officially terminated. He had taken everything, not with a shout, but with a series of quiet, devastatingly precise keystrokes. He had taken their reputation, their power, and finally, their fortune. Ethan looked at the three of them, the architects of his pain, now just rubble in the wake of his justice. There was no look of triumph on his face, no hint of a smile. There was only a quiet, profound sense of closure, the end of a chapter. He picked up his single sheet of paper from the podium. "Never underestimate the silence of a man who has endured for too long," he said, his voice now a soft but resonant whisper that felt directed at the entire world. For in that silence, he is not idle. He is building. He looked out at the stunned crowd one last time. "Thank you." And with that, he turned and walked away from the podium. He did not look back at the chaos he had unleashed. He simply walked, with a steady, even pace, through the parting crowd, past the flashing cameras, and out of the grand hall, leaving the ruins of his past behind him for the second and final time. The foundations of the old world have crumbled, and a new structure stands in its place. But every ending is just a new beginning, and the echoes of the past have a way of shaping futures yet unwritten. Join us next time as we explore another story of a family untied.